Hi, my name is Ryan Rinaldi, and I have the honor of serving as the president of the student government here at Temple. I'm joined today by my vice presidents, Brittany Boston and Ben Nguyen. And today we're going to have a conversation about a football stadium on campus with none other than the president of Temple University, Dr. Neil Theobald.
Thank you.
Dr. Theobald, thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Great to be here.
We'll lay out the conversation first. We're going to talk about financials. We're going to talk about priorities of a football stadium. Okay. We're going to talk about the community impact, and then we're going to go into logistics and talk about what the game day experience of a football day would be like here at Temple. Okay. I'm going to hand it off to Ben, who's going to touch on some of the financial questions.
So again, thank you for being here and joining us. Our students really appreciate it, and we're going to get right into it with the financials first. Our question is, the stadium plan put to the board will take about $126 million to build. Are students expected to pay for this from their tuition or out of pocket?
No.
And if not, where is this money coming from?
We'll take the funds that we currently pay in rent to the Philadelphia Eagles, which is where we currently play our games. We'll bond that amount over 30 years. And then we have been fundraising for about 2 years now, and that'll cover the rest of the cost. So there was no student component to the cost at all.
Right, so no one's tuition won't be affected in the future or right now?
Nope.
Okay. And if that $126 million is for construction of the proposed stadium, how does Temple University expect to fund the operations and the day-to-day expenses of the proposed stadium?
Well, any building project on campus includes a 5% payment within the construction costs for upkeep. So the upkeep is built into the cost of the stadium. In terms of operations, that's what you'll use your ticket sales, the television revenue that we receive from ESPN, the apparel deal we have with Under Armour. That pays for all the operating expenses.
Okay, that's great. So we were just in Harrisburg last Wednesday and for the appropriations hearing, and given the budget impasse in Harrisburg, would the university still prioritize a football stadium given the cuts or no state funding?
Oh, if we were to receive no state funding, we would clearly put the stadium on hold. I mean, that's a point. You always have to set your highest priorities. The stadium is simply, it has a lot of arguments for it. The financial argument that I mentioned earlier, we can take what we pay now and then we wouldn't be subject to rent increases going forward. The ability to bring alumni back to campus, the student experience of having a football stadium on campus, all of those things. But if we were facing budget cuts, no, we clearly would not move forward with this at that time until our budget situation was stabilized.
Right, okay. So how does the university see a football stadium affecting donors for both the stadium rights, but also for the university as a whole?
Well, we've been having conversations with parties that are interested in the naming rights, so that's gone very well. I just think overall there are so many alumni who come to our games 10 miles away. They never visit campus. And I've been here 4 years, and people who've been here much longer than I will tell you how much this campus has changed dramatically. So I think the ability to bring the alumni back to campus, to interact with the schools, to interact with students, I think that what athletics is I always talk about athletics as the front porch of the university. It brings people in so that we can tell them more about what's actually going on in the house and get them interested and involved in those sorts of things. And that often will lead to requests for gifts and fundraising.
That's great. Well, thank you for your questions and your answers.
Thank you.
Dr. Theobald, there's some students that have concerns about, have looked at other universities across the country that have built football stadiums and expected a certain number of attendance and accounted for a certain number of attendance to pay for the services and the operations, the upkeep. Now, is it a part of the conversation, or is Temple having the conversation about what happens if the attendance at a new football stadium isn't as high as you expect it to be, and where do you think some funding would come from, aside from tuition, to accommodate for that lack of attendance?
Well, I think if you look at it, there are two alternatives here. There's either you continue to rent a stadium at a higher cost. We actually save about $3 million a year by building our own stadium. The cost of building is less than the cost of renting. So if you were to have an attendance problem, and our attendance last year, if you take out the 2 sellout games, we were still averaging 30,000 a game.
Yeah.
But if, say, attendance were to go down, we're actually in a situation where we have lower costs to cover with the lesser attendance. So this is certainly a less risky approach than entering into a long-term lease.
Certainly.
In our current location.
Okay. Now, to kind of round out the financials aspect of this conversation, there are some students that are confused, I would say, probably about how the costs would affect Temple in today's day and age. In thinking, oh, they see a headline, it's $126 million. Where do we have that kind of money right now? Can you elaborate a little bit more on the process or the financial details of how a bond might be taken out and go into a little bit more of that?
If you were to take what we currently pay, and our lease has 2 more years to run, and then there's a request that we pay more going forward from that point. If you take what we currently pay, that would bond $72 million. The remainder of the cost is being covered by fundraising, naming gifts, and so on. So there is no component of this that is not money we're either already spending or money we've raised in place.
Okay, great. That's interesting. I think students really need to get those details to understand this isn't a one-time cost. This is something that will be paid off over time.
That's right. Well, and you fix, and the thing with a bond, of course, is you fix that cost for 30 years.
Yeah.
When you're going in to renegotiate your lease every 5 years, generally those costs go up over time. So we will fix our costs at less than we would be paying under the new lease, and we would keep that cost fixed for 30 years. So it frees money for us to use for other needs around campus.
That kind of goes right into my next question. We're going to change the conversation now to a little bit more of the macro thought of why a football stadium. So talking about the priorities of Temple right now. So question's pretty straightforward. Why a football stadium? Why invest in athletics? Why invest specifically in football? Why build a stadium on campus as opposed to investing somewhere else?
Sure. Football is a major component not just to our athletic program, but to the university. As I said, it is a great way to connect with our students, connect with our alumni. It is a profitable enterprise. We generate more revenue from football than we spend. Last year, obviously, we generated a lot more revenue from football than we spent. So for the financial health of the athletic program, it's a very important component. The term I always use is football drives the bus. It is the major for TV revenue, for apparel revenue, for ticket revenue. It is the most important. So as we look at the 2 options of do we go into an increased cost new lease, or do we take our current cost and fix that over a period of time, financially the most viable way to go forward, build your own stadium, fix your costs, and then get all the other benefits of bringing alumni back, student engagement, and so on. And a piece of this that we haven't discussed yet that I think is vitally important is the retail component to this. I teach a freshman seminar, and one of the issues this year was what can Temple do to provide more retail opportunities, both to the community and to the campus? Well, this would have a significant retail component, bookstores, coffee shops, clothing stores, that sort of thing, in a pedestrian-only environment across on the west side of Broad Street. So it's a stadium, but it's also day-to-day a retail component that this community is in great need.
Yeah, I think that's important to know, and I think Brittany's going to follow back up and we'll talk a little bit more about the community later on in the conversation. I know that there are some students, and there's been some headlines talking about priorities, and saying, why build a football stadium when students are asking for other services, like, for example, a sexual assault center? Can you talk to a little bit about where the funds come from, I guess, to reiterate the question that's been asked earlier, and talk about whether those funds are earmarked, or why the university is taking the approach that it is?
Now, the funds are clearly earmarked. I mean, you're taking the money that you're currently spending for rent and using that to pay debt. If you weren't taking out the debt, you'd have to pay that in rent. So it isn't freed up to use somewhere else. And then the gifts we receive certainly are tied to using that money for a stadium. In terms of the specific Rape Crisis Center that you mentioned. We had a sexual assault task force here starting in fall of, we're 16, so 14. Their report was last spring. It was chaired by Dean Laura Siminoff for the College of Public Health, and that was not their recommendation. Clearly, if we're saving money from having this stadium versus what we would be spending to rent, that does make money available. If the recommendation change at some point in the future, you could go forward with that. But currently, we are acting upon the recommendations that we received from the groups that are looking at that.
Okay. I think it's important because Temple Student Government was also part of that task force.
That's right.
And I think it's, can you talk a little bit more about going into the sexual assault, the Title IX, allegations against Temple, talk a little bit more about what Temple's doing to take care of that?
We have appointed Dr. Valerie Harrison, who was in our general counsel's office, to be senior advisor to the president in this area. Title IX, Equal Opportunity Employment Act, affirmative action, all those areas will be under one person. So she will be able to share resources across groups, make sure we're operating effectively. The adjudication process on campus will be underneath her office. So we'll have a one-stop place anytime there are complaints, there are concerns. Val Harrison will be the one who will be responsible for handling all of that.
Okay, cool. All right, now, I think we're going to change the conversation over. There's a lot of students concerned about a community and the community impact.
As are we.
Yes, and I'm going to hand it over to Brittany to talk about that.
Thank you, Dr. Theobald, for joining us. So where will the proposed stadium be, and how many families will be dislocated or relocated because of the stadium?
The stadium's on current university property, so there will be no one displaced. It will be roughly on the southeast corner of Norris and 16th. Why I say roughly is there's retail that goes in there. There will be the expansion of the Student Recreation Center that'll go in south of there. So the exact location, but it will be on the northwest corner of that quadrant, roughly.
Okay.
So no one is displaced in that spot. That's where we currently play lacrosse, field hockey, and there is a track. And each of those this summer will relocate about 3 blocks south of campus.
Thank you. So how, if at all, would the public playground on 16th and Berks be affected by the proposed stadium?
Not at
Temple
all.
Student Government will actually be working and building up the playground and the pool, but that's a short-term plan. So what long-term effects will that have?
It'll have none. That land will stay as exactly as it is now, and certainly we'll provide whatever support we can but that's not part of the land we're looking at for the stadium or for the retail.
So what type of economic impact would the proposed stadium have on the community? And would members of the North Philadelphia community have employment opportunities at the stadium?
Well, I think there's short-term and there's long-term here. In the short term, clearly there's the construction jobs from building the stadium itself. We estimate that'll be about $100 million in labor costs. So there will be a number of people in this community and in the region more generally that will be employed in that project. But I think the major economic impact is long-term with the retail. You'll have 2 to 3 blocks of retail space here that will employ a significant number of people. So I think the stadiums often are sold as kind of an economic development engine, and the research will say that generally isn't the case. It's short-term, but the retail, that's what's ongoing.
So students are concerned about community members being a part of the planning process. How do you plan to include community in the future, and have you talked to community members?
We are at the very beginning of the planning process. 2 weeks ago, we chose an architect, Curtis Moody from Columbus, Ohio, who's done a number of stadiums around the country. And he's on campus today. He's having a dinner with community members tomorrow night. Literally, he's no drawings, no plans at all. So the community will be involved from the very first step of the process.
Okay.
All right. I think we're going to transition into more of the logistics.
Okay.
I know you just mentioned the architect, the board approving to hire an architect. You've hired an architect. Can you talk a little bit more about the history of that firm or why that architect was picked?
I actually have had the privilege of working with Moody Nolan in my previous employer, Indiana University. We expanded our stadium, and his firm did the architectural work there. Beautiful architect. I can tell you the buildings that he does. He did the stadium at SMU, which is a gorgeous stadium. It is the largest minority-owned architecture firm in America. He is the top stadium architect in the country, and I'm certain that with the input of the community, with the input of the campus, he will design an absolutely stunning stadium.
Okay. So what is the expected timeline for the stadium to be built?
Well, it's to be determined. We are in discussions with the community. We have 2 more years on our lease, but the Eagles and the university have entered into 2 one-year extension possibilities. So in working with the community, once we have an agreement that the major issue there, I think, is traffic. Parking we can take care of. The tailgating I think we can take care of. But in meeting the concerns about bringing 30,000 people onto campus, we bring 20,000 a day, but they come over the course of the daytime rather than all at one time. So once we have the conversations with the community finished, then obviously we need to go to the city in terms of zoning and so on, and then construction will be about 18 months. So once we get to that point, we're 18 months from playing.
Wow. Okay.
Well, that's really encouraging to hear that the new architect is already getting involved with the community. I know that's a really important aspect that our students are stressing about. And another big concern is how big is this stadium going to be? And if it is going to be big, how is it going to be able to handle games such as the Penn State game or the Notre Dame game?
Sure. We've been in discussions. It's going to be 30,000. Roughly that area, 30, 35, that's about what we draw a game. For those games that are larger than that, we've had discussions with the Eagles about renting the Lincoln Financial for a single day. So I think that's the model we'll use, play here, except if we have a very large crowd expectation, then we would rent the stadium for a day.
Okay, that makes sense.
Sure.
So how will spectators get to the proposed stadium, and where will those who choose to drive park? We talked a little bit about
We
parking.
actually have more parking spaces on campus than we've ever used at Lincoln Financial Field. So spaces to park will be fine. We are in a very unique situation here of having 2 subway stops and a train station within walking distance of the stadium. So hopefully we'll use a lot of, in partnership with SEPTA, we'll use a lot of public transportation of getting people to games. The tailgating that we have planned would all be on the east side of Broad Street on the main campus, because again, our reason for bringing people here, we want them to know about the university and be involved with the schools. All of that's on the east side of the campus. So that's where the train stations are. Obviously, the subway stations stop there as well. So that's it's dual modal. People can drive here. We've got enough space for that, but we're trying to encourage people to take public transportation both ways.
Definitely. So you did mention tailgating, and the link offers, a lot of tailgating opportunities. So how will this new stadium offer, tailgating opportunities? Because that's a part of our Temple culture.
Absolutely. I think the tailgating, we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves here, but I think that'll be mostly structured around schools and around the residence halls. So I can imagine a tailgate for the College of Liberal Arts, the Fox School of Business, one for the School of Media and Communication. Those students who live in Morgan Hall, there's a lovely courtyard there that they could use for tailgating. So I think it'll be decentralized, it'll be mostly likely under tents or in the grass on the east side of campus.
So to take that a step further, we currently have a number of parking spots. Like you said, we bring 20,000 students or people to campus on a daily basis. Now, while a lot of them take public transportation, there's still a number of parking spots that we currently have. And I can imagine that those spots will obviously be a more traditional type of behind-the-car tailgating kind of experience. Now, while we're on the topic of kind of comparing things to how it would be here to how they are at the link, to bring up the link, for example, if the link is offered at a discount or for free, one, is that something that's feasible or realistic? Or two, would we still pursue an on-campus stadium if it was offered for free or
It
discount?
clearly is tremendous benefit of an on-campus stadium. I don't like to speculate of where negotiations, we have been negotiating with the Eagles for several years.
Sure.
And we at the point at which we are. But yeah, clearly having the game on campus, bring alumni back, allow students to walk to the games, tailgate in their residence hall. I think it's just tremendous benefit that we just simply don't have at Lincoln Financial Field.
Sure. I think we're going to transition the conversation now into more of that experience type of that game day experience. And I'm going to come back around to a little bit more of those in-depth details you mentioned about the residence halls. You mentioned about students living off campus. But while there's some people that question the idea of a stadium, that a lot of the supporters are excited about what this could do for the program. So to ask more about the program, how do you think building a stadium on campus would affect Temple football, specifically in trying to go into maybe a higher, maybe Power 5 conference? And what do you think that kind of impact, financial impact, just other types of macro positivity around Temple and Temple's brand could a stadium bring?
Well, I think the more you bring people to campus, clearly that is nothing but good for the university. In terms of the conference situation, we're quite happy in the conference we are in, but if opportunities present themselves, clearly the television deals in some of the other conferences are superior to what we currently have. So you'd certainly be something you'd be interested in. I think in terms of the team playing on their own campus, the view from where that is, that's where we play intramural softball the other night, and you're looking across the lights of Center City, Philadelphia. It's a gorgeous location. So I think as far as a wonderful vista for television and for spectators that are there, that would be as nice a stadium as there is in the country. So the perception, I think, can only help it be improved and continue to do well. So I think it'll help the team. The finances of it, as I said, even if you end up with exactly the same revenue you have now, we're going to have fewer costs. So that we clearly come out ahead on that as well. So it's a win-win-win all the way around. And again, I think the retail component really adds something that we don't have otherwise.
To add another win, I think there's a lot of students out there that are really excited at now. Thinking realistically as a senior myself and being a junior, this is still something that we wouldn't see as students. So a lot of alum are excited about this. How do you, especially with the emphasis that your administration has placed on alumni engagement, how do you expect that to go over with alumni, and what kind of impact would you see long term for the university?
I'm out talking with alumni almost every day, and with various meetings and such. The response has been incredibly positive. The idea of being able to come back to campus, take their kids to where they did various things when they were students here, learn more about what Temple is doing today. The response has just been overwhelmingly positive.
You mentioned, and this is really going to round out our conversation today. You mentioned bringing your kids back to campus. I'm going to ask you here, put yourself in my shoes. Coming back to campus in 10 years, hopefully with wife and kids. How do you expect that day going over? And what do you think I can expect coming back as an alum?
Well, 10 years from now, we will have a brand new library. That at that point, it won't be brand new because that opens in 2018. We hopefully at that point will have moved the science buildings that are in the way of the quad right now. So you'll come into the center of campus. You'll have this gorgeous library with a beautiful quad centered around with the science building on the east side of that, Paley Library on the south side of that, which will be something other than a library at that point. The Tyler School of Art on the north side. Then you'll go to tailgate at your former college over at the Fox School and have them meet all your former professors who will say what a fabulous student you were when you were here and tell your kids they need to be just like their father. And then you will join the procession as it goes across Broad Street into the open area there in the football stadium, watch the game, then come back across, and hopefully we will celebrate the win after the game, and your children will be thinking, what year do I start as a student here at Temple University?
Wow, that's something to look forward to.
It does.
Dr. Theobald, on behalf of the student government, I want to thank you for taking the time to have an important conversation that students are asking about, they're concerned about. I think this is a conversation that brought a lot of light to areas in which they might not have already seen it. And I think it's important to continue these discussions, and I thank you for all you do.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you
you much.
so much.
Thanks.